Simcha, celebration, Simcha, Simcha, celebration of life.
Hello and welcome to Simcha, a celebration of life. I'm your host, Aaron Halevi. In today's show, Ray Perkel talks about how to live a more meaningful life, and we learn more about King David's harp. In today's segment of Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, Ray Perkel explores how we can alter our path in life. Our success in fulfilling our purpose must not be gauged against how well we are performing the mitzvot, the commandments, alone, but also against how we impact the world around us.
The second chapter of the Ethics of the Fathers of Pirkei Avot begins with a very interesting statement, and it says, Rabbi Omer, and Rabbi refers to, the word means rabbi, but it refers specifically to Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who was the editor of all the Mishnayos, a very great sage. And he said, Eizoi hu derech yeshara sheyovar la'adam, which is the right way for a person to choose in his life. What's the right way to live? And he says the answer is as follows: Kol shehi tiferes la'oiseha, v'tiferes lo min ha'adam. Whichever way is beautiful, tiferes, or harmonious, or acceptable for the one who does it, and acceptable to those around him, to people around him. So, wait a second, what is this teaching us? I mean, it sounds quite nice. Obviously, we want to be in a harmonious relationship with ourselves and others. But what we learned in the previous chapter, in those opening words especially, is that the choice of pathway through our lives and how we live our lives and how we conduct our lives, if it's motivated and if it's sourced within our own rational mind, our own intellect as human beings, then we're likely to get into trouble. And there's been ample example of that throughout human history, where people claim that their ethical standard is better than those of others, etc. So it's mandatory that we realize that true ethics, authentic ethics, effective ethics, and ethics that are going to have universal resonance must come from a transcendent dimension, from God Himself. And that's what the opening lines of the first chapter taught us. So how can we now say that the right way for a person to choose is that which is acceptable to himself and those around him? So here's the teaching. If we surrender to God's will, which is the idea of accepting the divine authority of wisdom, and that's the guideline for life, that is the foundation of existence, of successful existence in our human lives, because we can trust that what God tells us to do is for our own good. He's not telling us to do things which are not for our own good. He's telling us to do that which is going to give us the fulfillment that we want in our lives, and the success and the harmony. So if we're relying on God and we live our lives doing the right thing, that's fantastic. But we can easily lapse into a situation where we are ritualizing all our daily lives by doing the right thing, but our hearts are completely elsewhere. What this opening verse in the second chapter is reminding us of is that it's important for us to work on ourselves as well. Because nowhere in the Torah does it say that we must be generous. It says we must give charity. In other words, we must do things that express generosity. The Torah tells us the do's and don'ts, but there's no commandment to have a generous disposition, to have a generous nature, if you like, or a willingness to be generous. As long as we're doing it, that's okay, but we might be very resentful while we're doing it, and how good is that for our health and for the productive outcome of the deeds that we do, although they might be correct deeds, and in alignment with God's will, but our hearts and minds also need to be brought into the picture. And that's what Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is telling us in the opening of the very next chapter, chapter 2. He's telling us that we must choose a way of being, incorporating the idea of working on ourselves and refining ourselves to the point where our nature, our disposition, becomes aligned with God's will as well. Then we don't have to live our lives in a state of anxiety and constant discipline that we're always doing the right thing, living on edge. Am I going to be judged favorably? Am I going to be judged unfavorably by God? But naturally we have a love of doing the right thing. And our intuition kicks in, because deep down inherently within our souls, we are made that way. We do know what's right and wrong, and we don't need to be told what to do. So now we have a balance and a harmony. That's the word tiferes, means harmony and balance, between two opposite tendencies, our natural instinctive tendency as human beings, which is not dissimilar to the instinctive tendency of animals, which is about self-preservation. In the human condition, that translates very easily into selfishness and self-interest, self-preservation, self-gratification, and those become the values by which society at large, as we can easily tragically observe. So this is an encouragement to understand that the way of ethical behavior from the Jewish point of view, and something which will enhance the life of any human being, is when not only our external behavior, the way we manifest in the world, is in line with the divine will, but also our internal dimension, our hearts and minds are also in alignment. And that's the idea of beauty and harmony. And then we can rely on the intuitive spirituality that is really inherent within all of us. If we raise our vibrational level through our study of Torah and through our alignment and self-refinement, we become better people internally. So we now become more congruent. We now become people of integrity. Not that we are showing up as if we're doing the right thing all the time, but we are inherently doing the right thing because we've transformed our being into alignment with the divine will. And that's the picture of integrity that Rebbe Yehuda Anossi is inviting us to take on board, which is a life of tiferes, a life of harmony. And in this context, what we're seeing is that it refers here to the harmony of the external, of our external actions, the way we show up in our deeds in the material world, and our hearts and minds, which is the internal dimension of ourselves, so that the two are in harmony with each other and not in conflict with each other.
The mystical sounds of the harp have been heard from time immemorial. From Yuval, one of the great-grandchildren of Adam and Eve, to the young shepherd who became King David, the melodious melodies of the harp have been played. Today, Mika and Shoshana of Harrari Harps continue with this tradition of making and playing the ancient biblical harp.
Harrari Harps was founded by myself and my husband about 35 years ago when we first came to Israel, and I wanted a harp of my own. I had wanted it for a long time, and we lived in the United States, we traveled a lot, and he's an instrument maker by profession, so I thought, well, maybe he can do this. So he liked the idea, but we never actually did. And then we came to Israel, and I thought, this is a nice time, you know? So we talked about it, and then finally he said, I feel like I really want to make this harp. And around that time, we were visiting someone who had a very extensive library, and I was looking through the library, and I found an archaeology book that showed a cave drawing of a harp in Megiddo, up in the north, that the archaeologists, it had a drawing of a harp, and the archaeologist said that the drawing was about 3,000 years old by carbon dating. And we both got really excited and said, why should we build a harp from anywhere else in the world? We should build a harp from Israel. That's where we're living. This is what needs to be here. What we didn't know is that no one had done this before. And it's been like 2,000 years since there's been a harp, literally, in Israel. We hung them on the willow trees. We went into exile with a hope and a prayer that one day someone would take them off the willow trees. And so in a way, completely innocently, we did that.
We build all of these harps as if they were being built for the temple. So we start out with that idea and that kavanah, that direction. And we want this to be the most beautiful thing that comes out from Israel, because this is the national instrument. Many years ago when we first came here and we found that we were the first to be making them, we decided then that we would care mostly about quality and the rest in sound, everything, just to make them the most perfect instruments possible. And now they're, not only do we make them for the Third Temple and for actual playing instruments, but this is an extremely sophisticated small harp. The soundboards are tapered spruce or fir wood from 5 millimeters to 2 millimeters, quarter sawn, made from several pieces. We don't use any metal in the construction of the harp. We figured ways to connect everything together without having to do that. And they're the best sounding small harps in the world, besides being biblical harps.
When we did our research into what's written in the Gemara, which is the Talmud, which is basically the writings upon writings upon writings of everything that happened in those days, they mentioned that the highest number of strings that they ever put on a harp was 22. It could have been 12, it could have been 14, it could have been 10. We have a harp that has 10 strings, because 10 is mentioned many times in the Psalms. But the 22 is very interesting because there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And so, not the first harps we made, but at a certain point, we began to incorporate these 22 letters carved, hand-carved into the harp, into the soundboard of the harp, that can be played, literally played, like Aleph, Hey, whatever you want to play, and create words. And there are a few Psalms, and also the last part of Proverbs, which talks about the woman of valor, and that's in a group of 22. Like, it starts Aleph, Bet, Gimel, all the way through to 22, and then it stops. And there are a few Psalms like that. And so we use that idea, not having anything concrete to really build on, but I know that they used it too, because that's why David created these Psalms specifically alphabetically. So we gave people the opportunity to actually play the words that they're thinking of, or if they have the time, the patience, and their Hebrew is good enough, they could literally play the entire Tanakh from the beginning to end. It's kind of like a musical score. And some things sound random, and other things, it's like, oh my, it looks like somebody wrote this as a musical score. Not only the words, not only the codes, not only all these hidden things that are in the Holy Bible, but also that music is there too. So the combination of the 22 strings, the 22 letters, and the opportunity to use them in ways that may not have happened in thousands of years, I think is a very bright future for the world that's coming, which is all good.
This is a walnut harp. All of these parts are walnut, including the center strip with the carvings of the alphabet on it. Next to each string, the 22 strings, and the neck here. And that'll go on the harp like this.
The harp is an instrument that kind of, we call it the atara. That's because the atara is the name for a crown in Hebrew, and is the crown that you get when you leave this world and you ascend to heaven. So it's the highest crown that exists. And we call it that because it was the crown of all the instruments that were played in the temple for sure, and I guess probably in the world. And so they say that the word itself, which is in Hebrew is nevel, They say that the reason that it's called that is because all the other instruments kind of are a little ashamed when they hear it, because it's so heavenly, and it literally brings down a little bit of heaven.
Every one of our harps are 90%, 99% are custom ordered. After they decide that they want one, then we stay in touch, and we go over designs, what they would like in their harp, the carvings, the inlays, the stones, the woods, and stuff like that. So it's a very individual item. This is Yefim, and he's our carver, and he does all of the decorative work that we do, the inlays, the metal work, and special polishing. And here he's doing a carving of pomegranates and olive leaves. People that buy our harps, by and large, they use them to play. Because with this particular, with the halftone levers, they can play everything that they can play on a piano. And so all the keys are available. Some people buy them just to look at, too. Some of our more elaborate instruments they've bought, they're just to have them on a shelf or a pedestal.
It's an instrument that is so intertwined and interwoven with our history and our future that it's really kind of a blessing and a miracle that it's returned at this time. And all through these years, we've been improving it, making them better, making them more beautiful. And our greatest joy is when people come to us with their dreams and their visions and their ideas and just the artistic things that they would like to incorporate into their personal harp, which literally becomes a musical prayer partner, where they can go in the footsteps of King David and play the harp from their heart, connecting with heaven, and perhaps receiving their new song, because it says, sing a new song to Hashem, to God. So the new song is already in us, and we just have to access it, and that's what the harp does.
Mika and Shoshana Harrari have been building biblical harps in Israel since 1984. Based on designs from information obtained in the Bible, Talmud, and archaeological findings, Harrari harps have spread the mystical sounds of David's harp from the streets of Jerusalem to the four corners of the world.
Personally, I learned more because I had to kind of research what we were really doing, because we didn't know what we were doing. We just were taking this ancient cave drawing and making it into a real-life instrument, and then going back into the Talmud, into the Torah, into the Tanakh, to find out what was going on here with the harps. Like, we know David played the harp, but also in the temple there were 4,000 Levites who knew how to play the harp. They may not all have played it all at once, but they all had their own personal harps. And on the three major festivals of Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot, there were so many harps that it was recorded that the sound could be heard in Jericho. I myself am a Bat Cohen, so my ancestors were in the temple for sure, and maybe, you know, something of me was there too. And I've always connected with the harp. Like, when I was a child, my parents gave me piano lessons. I tried to play the guitar when I was about 16, but none of them, they were nice, and they're all beautiful. Like, all music can be beautiful, of course, but I just had this thing about the harp that I wanted to play specifically a harp, and I don't know why. Honestly, I have no idea why, consciously. But as I learned more about myself and about the purpose of the harp, I began to see that most likely it's something from the past that connects with me, that I need this instrument. This is an instrument where I can express myself, where the other instruments, they're beautiful, but they weren't mine. They belong to other people who play them much better than me. But for me, the harp speaks to my soul, and it's the expression, the musical expression of my own soul, and it brings me such great joy that I can go into a better way of loving other people rather than being irritated and, you know, kvetchy. The harps of David were used in the past for healing, for prophecy, for spiritual warfare of some kind, for joy, for prayer, for blessing. That's what they were used for. And as I discovered each one of them, it touched my heart that that's what I should use them for too. And so when I play my harp, I try to put in those attributes, the attributes of healing, of prayer, of even prophecy, of all kinds of good things, because the world is in a very hard place right now. There's a lot of trouble everywhere, and we need help. And this was an ancient traditional way of helping ourselves, because the harp puts out a vibration, and that vibration connects with the vibrations that are already in the world of healing, of prophecy, of joy, of prayer, and lets our soul have a vessel to put goodness, because right now we need a lot of goodness, and we need people who are willing and even excited to be part of that and to share the goodness of their heart through the ancient harp of Israel, which is being put in its rightful place, because in the past it wasn't an instrument necessarily of entertainment. Like now, music has become entertainment. And that's wonderful, but the real purpose got lost. And the purpose is to connect with the creator of the universe, to connect with God. Let him tell you things, and you pour out your heart and tell him what's in your heart, so that somewhere the connection that joins heaven and earth can actually go out in the world and tip the balance between good and evil in the side of good.
Well, that's all we have for this week's episode of Simcha, a celebration of life. As always, we would love to hear from you, so please send us a message on Facebook at Spirit Sister Productions. From me, Aaron Halevi, and the rest of the Simcha team, have a wonderful week ahead.